Hello, everybody, and welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around Fantasy Premier League. My name is Tom.
My name is James. Well done, Tom. You've become very good at this intro stuff. I must get rid of Such permanently. You must just join me every Monday, mate.
I'd be happy to, man, but yeah, it's definitely one take. There's definitely not an outtake there in the background after some calamity that just happened, is there? But yeah, good to be back on, mate. Good to be back on. Thanks for having me on.
Brilliant. For those who've lived under a rock or perhaps never listened to us before or never heard Tom before, let me introduce you to Tom Campbell, the Mayor of FPL, one of my best friends in the FPL community, the best standing guest host to replace Suj. Whenever Suj goes on holiday, I message Tom and go, Tom, main pod, do you fancy it, mate? And Tom's here to do it again. How are you, mate?
Mate, I'm really well. Like we were just talking off camera. I just said I'm excited about the upcoming season. It's been a few months since you and I caught up and talked FPL, but I enjoyed the break. Obviously, had the I'm a West Ham fan for anyone who doesn't know, so I had a nice high point to end the season. Enjoyed the break, and I'm feeling it this season, mate. I'm looking forward to playing Fantasy Premier League again. So yeah, I'm doing well, mate. I'm looking forward to creating a podcast with you again.
Good. I suppose I have to give you the West Ham congratulations now because I didn't do it off camera because we never mentioned it.
No.
Well done. Just briefly, how was that?
Do you know what? It was incredible. So I actually watched the game, which is quite rare for me for a game like that. But people derided it, and I think you can accept a bit of that. But to me, it was a really big deal. Like, I hadn't seen them in a big final, sort of putting playoff success aside since the FA Cup final back in early 2000 and stuff. And it was kind of the only thing that made last season palatable. Really, people kind of forget just how bad that league season was, especially in the early part of the season, James. So the European campaign, like going unbeaten and stuff, really did make it kind of acceptable. And then to top it off with a final and the way that it was done was it was magic, man. It was a magic moment, and I'll forever remember it. So yeah, it was terrific.
I remember everybody who had a bad Premier League season because the amount that were worse than my team was a lot less than normal. So I've got them all on a piece of paper very, very clearly.
Yeah,
On today's pod, Tom's hosting, and the theme is what's new. And this
That's
was the
right.
theme that we discussed a couple of weeks ago. And I was kind of hoping by now that we might have this much promised new FPL format, which nobody seems to know what it is or what's
No.
going on. So we obviously can't discuss that. So I said to Tom, right, the theme's what's new. Work away with it. The floor
Yeah.
is yours, mate.
Cool. Thanks, man. And I think we've done a few of these in the past, and I think what we found is it's quite cool. Like James not knowing what's coming up. We've done that obviously with a quiz, which obviously don't need to know the questions up then. But even when I've come on and hosted in the past, not knowing, the conversation's then a bit more organic and stuff. So I've tried to keep it still around the theme of what's new, James, like you asked, and there is obviously tons of stuff under that banner that you can get in without having to shoehorn it at all. So what I've done is I'm going to do a little club focus, or we're going to do a club focus on some teams that I think are particularly FPL relevant to the listeners in
Okay.
terms of their game week one squad selections. And we're going to be talking about some things, and I've got some questions around those teams in terms of new things that have changed in the closed season, whether or not that's personnel in terms of the playing
Like it.
staff, or potentially change of style, stylistically, new managers, etc. So, yeah, you and I can talk the hind legs off a donkey, but so we could do. I won't say how many teams because we'll see how we go. But I've certainly got questions around several teams, and these are definitely going to be ones that I think people are going to be looking at when they come to select their FPL team. So that's what we're going to do.
All right.
Okay,
Sounds good. Let's go.
cool, man. All right, happy days. So the first one is Man United. So we know this is what we know, right, so far. So we know De Gea has left. It's off the back of a season whereby he picked up the Golden Glove, even with a couple of absolute pastings. We're expecting Onana to come in. So there's a new goalkeeper there. There's talk of Harry Maguire potentially leaving. Obviously, he's lost the captaincy today. We're recording on Sunday night. So I guess my question is, in terms of like what's new, James, how do you see them kind of shaping up defensively this season? Do you see that good form defensively kind of continuing? And do you like their defensive options for game week one? So we've got Shaw, 5.5 million, Martinez, Varane, 5 million. What are your kind of thoughts about Man United defensively this season as we go into Ten Hag's second campaign?
Yeah, I don't think we'll see much different. Obviously, the
Hmm.
keeper's going to be a massive difference. We
Yeah.
think it's what, like
Yeah.
99.5% done at time of recording. So
Hmm.
we've known for a couple of weeks that that was highly likely with Onana, who's a very different goalkeeper to De Gea. And I think most people are very much looking at Ramsdale's price at 5 million, thinking, well, he probably can't come in at more than that. But we should remember, as you already pointed out, United did have most clean sheets in the league last year. So it's not
Yeah.
impossible that
Hmm.
he comes in at 5.5. But obviously, Luke Shaw's well owned at the moment. And I think rightly so in comparison to the others. That might
Hmm.
shift and it opens up 0.5 for people who are maybe sitting there with Ramsdale and Shaw becomes Onana and Gabriel as an example. And you got an
Hmm.
extra 0.5 or so to play with. So I think the rest aren't as appealing. I
No.
don't think they're probably going to add anything additionally, partly because I think the performances of Aaron Wan-Bissaka and Victor Lindelof in the running were pretty decent,
Pretty
actually.
solid, weren't they? Yeah. I
Yeah,
agree. Yeah.
Wan-Bissaka was basically kind of disregarded, but had
He
to
was.
play and did quite well, and he's still a very good 1v1 defender.
Mm.
Lindelof actually had some outstanding performances. I think particularly about the FA Cup semi-final with Brighton, it was probably my man of the match and
Mm.
deputised pretty well. So
As a
Varane's,
third choice centre half, James, he's
yeah,
amazing, right? Ten Hag's going to love having Victor Lindelof. He can play in a few different positions as well, can't he? And do the job perfectly acceptably. So yeah, I hear you on that.
so I don't think they'll probably add in the positions, but I think in terms of the back line and the defenders, other than Luke Shaw, zero interest. There's so many other 5 millions that I'd prefer than
Yeah.
Martinez or Varane, to be totally honest. Who Varane will probably contribute a little bit more in terms of
Hmm.
threat from set plays than Martinez, but Varane's way more injury, but he's not going to play 38 games.
No, can't see it, can you?
Nah.
Definitely not. I think that was one of the reasons I think they might have been able to get him at the money they did from Real Madrid originally. I've got a feeling there might be something underlying there. No, that's not based on anything, but just the frequency of games he's missed. Maybe I have a little doubt then. Like Luke Shaw as well, but Onana coming in. James, do you think we're over egging the pudding? I know this is a FPL podcast, but obviously looks at sort of bonus point potential and passes and what have you. Expecting United to play out more from the back as a consequence of that, and that affect BPS at all, or do you
Yeah,
not
very
see it
much
going that
so.
way?
But then
Mhm.
Onana, anyone who watched the Champions League final, he clearly wanted to play centre back. So I think you
Mm.
can be looking at bypassing the centre backs even. So
Mhm.
it's a lot more keepers are doing that now. When you put them into certain structures, showing that like we see much more from Aaron Ramsdale playing for Arsenal than we did at Sheffield United in terms of actually punching a pass into midfield. And that's something
Mhm.
that David De Gea cannot do. So
No.
as much as, yeah, shorter, and I think De Gea actually, he obviously had that horrendous night in Seville. But in terms
Yeah.
of his adaptability last year, I didn't think he actually did too bad at his
Mm.
feet where it hadn't been a priority previously. But in
Mhm.
terms of distribution, Onana's different level. And you might even find rather than
Yeah.
playing out from the back more, it's quicker. Because Onana
Mhm.
will play a 40-yard chip pass to your
Yeah.
fullback on the halfway line and it'll be perfect. So probably
Yeah.
speed of attack might even increase for United.
Yeah. I'm excited to see how he does to come in. Not a Man United fan, but to see him in the Premier League off the back of that Champions League performance, James, where I thought he was arguably man of the match. Yeah, got a great acquisition to
He's
the
worked with
league.
Ten Hag, obviously, at Ajax
Yeah, he
as
has,
well.
yeah.
So they're
Uh-huh.
obviously very familiar with each
Yeah.
other.
So we like them defensively, so and a couple of options there. So I guess what about offensively? So Mason Mount, we know's come in, priced at 7 mil. Just the 82 points last season for him. We know Chelsea struggled. They still have no striker outside of Tony Martial. Obviously, the loan signing of Wout Weghorst was very much a band-aid, wasn't it? But I wondered how you saw them or see them rather from an attacking perspective this season. So they finished third last season, but only scored 58 goals in the Premier League, and yet Marcus Rashford broke the 200 point barrier. Obviously, we make a lot of a deal about that in at 9 million. A lot of talk in the FPL community about Bruno Fernandes, 8.5 million, getting loads of attention, isn't he? But I noticed he was often deployed a bit wider last season. So how do you see them from an attacking perspective for the initial part of the season? So they start with Wolves at home, away at your mob, and then home game against Forest. So it's a nice start, isn't it? But attacking wise, they weren't great shakes last season. What do you think?
We got a really great run after that Arsenal game in game week 4, game week sort of 5 to 9 before the Manchester derby looked really strong to
Mm-hmm.
potentially add and invest further in United as well. The common thought from most United fans I hear seems to be they think Mount will play as the right-sided 8, if you will.
Okay.
with Fernandes to the left at that and Casemiro sitting off deeper. But
Mm-hmm.
and that would move more towards what Ten Hag did at Ajax, more of a sort of like 4-1-4-1 and be a bit braver about it. Casemiro's obviously had an outstanding first season for United, but it would possibly be question marks in terms of like Declan Rice is brilliant going side to side, as you well know, Tom. Sorry, mate.
R.I.P.
I don't even know why I brought him up either, to be totally honest.
I was wondering how long you it was going to take to get him into the
once
conversation.
Casemiro gets pulled out into wide positions, though, it's a bit more difficult to come back around. But outstanding addition for United. But primarily they played with a Fernandes deeper, obviously a Christian Eriksen. I guess it's dependent in terms of Eriksen's minutes will probably influence that quite a lot in terms of setup. So that midfield three obviously doesn't have Eriksen in it. And I'm sure he's still going to have a very important role to play for United. As you said, Fernandes, we've seen on occasion playing in the front three and wide. I think Mason Mount is obviously capable of that sort of role as well. So it might come down to personnel and what they add offensively, because as it stands, if everyone's fit, it probably is Martial through the middle again and Marcus Rashford on the left.
You think
Anthony, I guess, is he doubtful for game week 1?
Well, it's more I've got doubts as to whether or not Martial can be trusted, or rather Ten Hag trusts him. So I wonder whether or not he's convinced himself that Marcus Rashford's going to be playing through the middle as a central striker, and then he's going to try and get Jadon Sancho into the team with Anthony on the other flank. I'm just really intrigued, because I actually wondered whether or not Mount had been seen as a natural successor to Eriksen, because I did start to wonder post-injury last season whether or not Eriksen, I love the player, whether or not he is actually, does he have the mobility for a Ten Hag system? I don't know.
You're getting a very different type of game with Christian Eriksen, a little bit slower. That's not a disrespectful comment, by the way. It's just he likes to dictate a game at his pace. They do have other wide players, Tom, young, like Garnacho, we saw pieces of last year, who has already been capped for Argentina. He's going to be looking for more minutes. And Amad Diallo was at Sunderland.
Yeah, great season.
He's 4.5 midfielder at the moment, who, if he went to another Premier League club, would probably be quite interesting, actually. He'll be looking for minutes. Anthony Elanga's been linked with the likes of Everton. And there's someone else who I've forgotten, to be honest. So it might be a few younger players we see a little bit more of this year. I think if they don't buy a new centre forward, then it probably is Sammy.
I think they've probably got to bring one in, right? They had Cavani, wasn't ever replaced, was he? And then Ronaldo, etc. So I'm sure that, Rasmus Højlund has been talked about at length, hasn't he? So I do expect them to link, and obviously that would change the what's new narrative. But I was just surprised when I was doing the prep for the podcast, James, as to only 58 goals. Marcus Rashford went for a 200 plus point season. So I did wonder whether or not we were cool on them offensively in spite of some nice value there, and or whether or not it's a more positive outlook for them. We think, but in relation
to a Rashford. If he's fit, we know what we're getting now, don't we? I think we can all recognise now that the previous couple of years we're almost right off from with him carrying this back injury. Got himself fully fit last year. We've seen the capability of the player again now. I think also helped for the World Cup was a big help for him as well. I think the confidence he would have got from that England performance against Wales, where he scored twice. But in terms of like the goals scored, like 58, what's Rashford hoovered up at that? 40% of it?
Exactly. Yeah, it's monstrous, isn't it?
Clear talisman. Whereas what did Arsenal get? They've got to be in the 70s or so, I would have thought Arsenal. Then you've got Saka, Martinelli, Odegaard, Jesus, all sharing that out. So from an FPL perspective, right now, Rashford's almost non-negotiable for me. I think if he's fit, I'm not bothered if he plays left or through the middle.
Fair enough.
I'd want him, definitely. Yeah,
and he'd be a preference. Any prospect of doubling up in that midfield with Bruno Fernandes as well?
I'm not massively keen. Like, I think Fernandes is too cheap and is very good price, but I think that applies to everybody in sort of the 7.5 to 9 bracket. And
I listened to the price pod.
You could throw in a few at 7, like Raheem Sterling, if they do well as well. Also, so no, not massively keen. Like, I don't prefer Fernandes versus Saka. It's not to say you can't have both, but. No, definitely Rashford worth the extra for me on Fernandes.
I guess the nuance there is that, do we have clarity over the penalties for those? I guess if the answer to that question is no, then having the double up does, I guess, protect you from that perspective as well. If it's being shared between them, I don't actually know if that's been definitively clarified.
We can only say at the end of the season that it looked like it became Bruno.
It did,
but it does feel like at any point he might go, "There's the ball." Rashford. And they seem to have that sort of relationship, I think. So I would say Bruno Fernandes is first choice penalty taker and will take the majority of them, but I wouldn't be surprised if Rashford ended up with
You think he's going to pick up the captaincy, James, as well? We've mentioned Maguire's lost it today off the conversation with Ten Hag. Do you think he's going to be a natural successor?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's probably the suitable answer. The thing with Fernandes as well is it's on the pitch every game, isn't he?
Always fit, isn't he?
He's never missed maybe one game with injury since he joined the club. Like, absolutely phenomenal, his completion of minutes. I think he played most minutes of any outfield player, I think, in Europe's top 5 leagues.
Wouldn't be surprised.
Year.
Yeah,
well, you would expect it to be a centre back, though, wouldn't you?
Oh yeah, of course.
But no, I'm pretty sure that was Bruno Fernandes. So from that perspective, yes. Could he maybe want to give that responsibility to someone like Rashford? Probably no.
No.
So I would expect yes, Bruno Fernandes. I mean, he's a dislikable.
He is, unless you support
the
club,
he is.
Right? He just is,
But then
you'd want him on your team, wouldn't you?
That's probably not going to bother you if he's leading your team. When it's going well, I will add, because he can have moments where exactly that, Yeah.
All right, mate. Cool. That's that was the kind of what's new for Man United. So moving on to the second club I picked out, and that's the Geordies, is Newcastle. So they, from a different perspective, James, so looking defensively for them, they conceded the same number of goals last season as Man City, just 33. So Pope's come in with a new price. You mentioned actually earlier on, didn't you? 5.5 million. And I guess off the back of 150 plus points, you can understand that. We've
justified.
Yeah, right. And then we talked annoyingly. I say annoyingly, I think everyone's going to be looking at Botman, aren't they? At 4.5 million, being banded as a bit of a cheat code, isn't he? Trips
a cheat code to what? Losing value?
I mean, I did follow your conversation on that, and then we'll talk about the fixtures up front, because it is a rough start, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Trippier, 6.5 million. So I'm not seeing masses right now in terms of new, other than those prices. So first question is, do you still like them defensively? So I just mentioned those fixtures. You've got Villa at home first, then away at Man City, and then a home match against Liverpool before, things smarten up. So what's your take on them defensively? Was last season an anomaly, or are you still super confident that they're going to be tight?
No, I think it's probably worth saying. I want to say you might have it in front of you, but I think it was only sort of 2 clean sheets from the last 13 or so.
Oh, I don't know, mate. I was looking at the whole season.
The run sort of in the autumn and winter period, they were absolutely outstanding. It did calm down quite a lot. Ironically, from the moment I bought Sven Botman, actually, on Wildcard, which is about game week 26. So, yeah, I think it was around about the last 13 weeks or so.
Fixtures matter, right? Fixtures matter.
They do. And I think it's okay. Like, to be honest with you, like, Botman's too cheap. And that's why he's in so many teams at the moment. If Botman was in 5% of teams, I'd probably start with him and go, yeah, I can carry that for a bit. I just know, I said this on the pod the other day, I just know the way it works, in the sense that if he doesn't do well with that ownership in those first 4 games, and you've got any other 4.5 performs well, the money moves. And it might be within our engaged community, it's like, no, I've got Botman to hold to 5. If that's your principal idea, the advice would be, we'll then hold. Don't chase the value. We all become very conscious of value at the start of the season. And as much as within our Twitter bubble or the FPL community bubble, we might think, now I've got him in for game week 5, set and ready.
Yeah.
If Arnaud Mihodzic gets 25 points in the first 2 game weeks, everyone's going to go and buy him, irrespective of the fact he's got Man City in game week 3. That's just where the money will go, because he's highest scoring player and he only costs 4.5. That's the way it always works at the start of the season. And that's what makes Botman bad. I'd look at them first 4 and go, what use is he to you? Sure, play him against Villa game week 1. Fine. You want to play him in the next 3? Nah. So
even that Villa game, James, I mean, I've been so impressed by how
Villa
they
failed to score
season,
once under Unai Emery, and he took over in November. So
and he's strengthened, right? They've a strengthened outfit, aren't they? So yeah, I don't see that being a straightforward game.
We're responsible for Newcastle's worst performance the last season as well.
That's true. Yeah. So I don't necessarily even that game. I mean, this obviously we're focused, aren't we, on team or squads that managers are selecting for game week 1. I think that's right to do so. But just whilst I've got you, longer term, James, you still think defensively they're a solid unit for the over the course of the season? You think it's still going to hold up?
Yeah, as long as the key personnel stays fit. And look, it's Newcastle, and we know what they've got riches wise, so there might be something that gets added. But yes, you could look at them last year and say the back 4 and the goalkeeper largely played nearly every game together, certainly at least once Botman got into the team sort of in the September period. So they had stability. That's really important. If you're going to progress like Newcastle did last year and keep that volume of goals conceded really under par, if you will, then stability is absolutely essential to that. Okay. So if it all stays fit again, then sure, why not? They're only strengthening the team in the sense Sandro Tonali is probably going to take over from Longstaff eventually. Go on.
Well, I was going to say, seamless segue, James. So under the, we're talking about what's new. So I sort of said defensively right now, and you're right, they could drop 100 million quid, couldn't they, at any particular point? Right now, it doesn't look like much has changed defensively other than the price points of some of those players, which we've talked around. Offensively and the attacking wide, lots is new from my perspective. So you mentioned Tonali already. And actually, I wanted to get your thoughts on Gordon as well. So they both come in at 5.5 million this season. So Tonali, more of a kind of central midfield player, FB ref, if folks listening aren't too familiar with him. Compare him, I don't know whether or not you agree with this, James, but they compare him to likes of Casido, Enzo Fernandez. I saw a Jude Bellingham comparison in there, which I'm not necessarily totally sure on.
Newcastle have underpaid by about 30 million by the sound of it.
So they give you an idea of the type of player Tonali is. Again, super excited to see him play. And we know, and you mentioned on a previous podcast, didn't you, about Anthony Gordon and what a brilliant showing he had in the under-21s recently.
Yeah, I was impressed with him.
Yeah, me too, man. Definitely. Once I could find it on telly. And we know Bruno Guimaraes, 6 mil, got some interest last season. So how do you see them attacking wise? Again, we talked about rough fixtures to start, but 68 goals they scored last season. So we mentioned United with the 58. Do you think anything different this season? Anything you like? How do you see the kind of Callum Wilson and Isak dynamic playing out? And obviously Tonali being embedded. What's your thought? And Anthony Gordon, obviously the discipline problems. I'm just interested as to how you see that them shaping up attacking wise.
I think as it stands, Isak, again, I mean, to be honest, great price, 7.5. I'm sure there's a period there's a period this season I'm going to want him. I'm absolutely certain of it. But it's not game week 1 as it stands. It might be game week 5 when it begins to turn from, although that's Brentford, so you could even argue later on. If Wilson's fit, you can't be having Isak at the moment, just from what we saw at the end of last season. Could it be that Isak takes over primarily? Yeah, sure. But then we might be looking at a little bit of limited minutes even for Isak, because Wilson's certainly going to get his minutes while he's fit. I think it's the right side of Newcastle's attack is what we long suspected would get worked on most. So Gordon may push Almiron on that side, but I think primarily we've seen him more on the left, really, which Newcastle have the great relationship on that side between Joel Linton and Willock, who swap over quite a lot. And there's been large links with Harvey Barnes of Leicester. So they might be looking to add there. So it might be that Gordon has the transition to be someone that maybe plays on the right. Tonali, as I said, is likely to take over from Longstaff. Now, what Longstaff did really clever. To be fair, Longstaff had a great season for Newcastle because when they had a couple of games without him and they lost the balance of the midfield, actually, because if Bruno Guimaraes is such a good player, basically he'll stay as the 6th. When he steps out, you need someone to have a little bit of cover for him. You don't really want to restrict Guimaraes. And Longstaff was great at that. And Guimaraes I'm pretty sure Longstaff didn't play in that game at Villa, ironically. Now, Tonali is a very intelligent player from what I've looked into, and he's going to be similar. Quality levels obviously going up a lot. I read that in his youth, a lot of people comparing him to people like Pirlo, De Rossi. But if you asked him himself, he'd compare himself to Gattuso. He's the player he sees inside of himself. Now, when I say Gattuso, everybody immediately thinks of Joe Jordan and headbutts and that malarkey. Gattuso was a very good and underrated player, but wasn't a goal-scoring midfielder. And Tonali's not going to be that guy either. I also think as well, I wouldn't be surprised if a little bit like what happened with Botman, if particularly because that start is so tough, that Longstaff starts the season and just carries on, and Tonali might not become a regular in the team till Septemberish. I wouldn't be surprised about that at all.
You remember, it's a good shout, James, because you remember when Casemiro was signed, I was like, right, that is what United needed for like the last 3 years. And it took him a while to get in. Scott McTominay started the season last season and actually started the season strongly. And Casemiro didn't get minutes at the beginning and then did. And everyone was like, this guy's quality. And he usurped him quite quickly after that. But I wonder whether or not you might be right. And it might be a while before we see Tonali really in
I
bed.
base
Who
that on the
knows?
fixtures and just actually what Eddie Howe did with Botman at the start of last season, that it did ease it a little bit. Then when the team was in good shape, you can transition it in a little bit slowly. Listen, if Tonali has a great preseason, he stands out and looks unbelievable, then I'm sure he'll probably go straight in. He's a very box to box. Like I said, he's defensively switched on. He is someone who does like to run beyond given the opportunity, particularly on fast counter attacks. But it's a rough start, and our league is much quicker than Serie A.
Yeah, it is that rough start, isn't it? It's quite frustrating. I mean, the fixtures, I guess, are the fixtures, and it can't be avoided. People will have these tough start. But I was just interested from your perspective, broad brush. You thinking Newcastle FPL wise, are they a better team defensively or offensively? Or is it somewhere in the middle actually? And you think we could end up
somewhere in the middle?
Yeah.
Like, to be honest, if Newcastle had Brentford, Sheffield United, Burnley, West Ham as their first four, which is their 5 to 8, I'd be starting with Botman as well. So
and potentially offensively as well.
It's a lot on those fixtures. Yeah, absolutely. That's like it's a great price at 7.5. To be honest, Wilson would be the one I'd be most interested in, even at the 8 million price.
At the 8, I was a bit frustrated with the 8. I thought, I mean, I can't whinge because the prices they've undercut pretty much everyone, haven't they?
It's fine.
But I wondered whether or not he might have come in at the same price as Isaac. But there you go.
I think there will. I mean, we don't need to watch much until they add more on top of Tonali because we know a lot about them already. But it's a rough set of fixtures that, listen, they're very capable, but I think we can come back to it, is my take, really.
All right, mate. Cool. Let's put Newcastle on the shelf for a moment. So third, I couldn't come on this show and not ask you about your team. So I wanted
to have left it to the end, Tom, because that might be nothing else gets covered now.
Well, I'm up for a deep dive because look, Spurs, under the headlines of what's new, James. I mean, looking at the outside in and nowhere near as close to the goings on at White Hart Lane as you, but from my perspective, it seems like there's so much going on. So, new manager, new signings. I got a question mark here. Is it a new approach? So lots of unknowns here, but we're speaking to a man in the know. So I wondered if you could give me and the listeners your read on what you're expecting in terms of, and you may have already done this on some of the upper tiers on the Patreon shows. Apologies if you have, James, but what you're expecting in terms of sort of team shape and style and how you see that playing out in terms of FPL. So the start for you guys, away at Brentford, home to Man United, and away at Bournemouth for game weeks 1 through 3. And that's my question, really. All those new things, how are you seeing it just from a kind of overall perspective in terms of how you're expecting to shape up and how you're expected to play and trying to apply an FPL lens to
that? In terms of shape, he wants to play a 4-3-3. That doesn't mean definitely that he will, by the way. And part of the problem with that is the squad is obviously got so many fundamental flaws in it. In the essence, there are players there who are completely structured to play in a back three.
Yeah.
So people like Pedro Porro are going to need retraining to something else, quite simply. Now, that might be a bit more defensive. That might be that he becomes a regular right winger. It might be that he inverts into midfield. Over the next couple of weeks, we'll probably find out in pre-season. Our first game is against West Ham in Perth tomorrow. What he wants to do is play 4-3-3, which will be very aggressive off the ball. He wants to win the ball back as quickly as possible. If he doesn't, then it will rest in a little bit once teams get into the opposition half, I think. He's not completely 100% gung-ho, but if we lose the ball, expect Tottenham to try and win it back very, very quickly and be aggressive about it.
Old school Pochettino-style press, is that what you're saying there, James? Because asking a lot of the players, isn't it, to do that?
On steroids, maybe.
Yeah.
But again, some of the profile, like Kane's not the Pochettino 22-year-old running around like a lunatic anymore, right? So this is where I said I'm not sure if someone like Maddison's necessarily suitable for that off the ball. Like, he works hard, he'll go and press and stuff, but you really need to be clever how you do it structurally, because Kane, it's not that he won't, right? He just can't do it like he was 22 anymore. He's hitting 30. He's a bit different profile of player now. So I have a little bit of concerns about that off the ball, because I think break beyond that, we might have some problems. We'll probably take a hiding or two in the first couple of months. And we'll be brave. Like, we'll go to Arsenal in game week 6, and his philosophy at the moment is we'll go there and we'll try and beat them. And that gives us a much better chance than what we've had under some of the recent managers. It also means we're more likely to get absolutely destroyed at the same time as well. So you can spin that either way. The 4-3-3 within possession, he wants to move it into a 2-3-5. So what you're commonly seeing with most at the moment is 3-2. So you'll have someone like a Trent or John Stones or Zinchenko moves from a defensive line of a 4, goes and sits with a single pivot, becomes a 2. What he wants to do ideally is move both fullbacks into the inverted position, leave the 2 centre backs behind.
Who
So
would
he's
that be then? Who would that be in the Spurs makeup then?
At the moment, with what we've got, most suitable to play the inverted is probably Emerson Royal and Destiny Udogie. Udogie's a really interesting one for FPL to watch over the next couple of weeks.
Interesting. Yeah.
He's 4.5. Porro could still be, by the way, because as I said, Porro could even start as the right-sided forward. It's not impossible. He's obviously in at 5.0, but what he ideally wants to do, he split it into 2-5. So you got the 2-3, and the other 2-8s will go into the line of the forwards in between the 2 wide players and Harry Kane, essentially. But because the profile of players is all wrong, he might do that very differently. So, for example, he might take a profile of player like Ndombele, who can't run around, but it's supposedly he's going to give a chance. 4.5.
Yeah, so I read.
Could also maybe be interesting. If he played, for example, as the right-sided 8, one way round it might be, for example, he goes, right, I don't want you to push into the front 5. We'll push Porro from right back, go high as possible, as quick as possible, and we'll move Kulusevski off of right wing into the 8 position, and then Ndombele becomes one of almost the inverted players, like a different hybrid where he goes from an 8 out of the ball to a more deeper position within the ball. He's going to have to look at solutions because the profile of the squad is all wrong.
It's a bit different, isn't it? From what I'm trying to picture that, what you're describing, it doesn't feel like a great match in terms of the squad that you've got in situ at the moment. But I guess there's still a month
completely overhauling anyway, Tom. So
it does. Yeah, interesting.
Someone like Maddison's obviously a great addition.
Yeah, of course.
It's certainly within possession anyway. It goes without saying. He's a creative player that we've desperately needed since Christian Eriksen. And he'll certainly fit in as one of the 8s. I wouldn't be surprised, Tom, if on Brentford opening day, it wouldn't shock me if he lined up with a midfield that was something like Bissouma, Maddison, and Kulusevski as a midfielder. Wouldn't surprise me. He comes across like he's batshit crazy offensively, mate. So that would then mean it would have to be like Son on the left, Kane up front. And it could be, like I said, under that situation, it might even be that Porro was the right-sided forward. It's not impossible, but that could look very dated in 48 hours. This West Ham game is going to tell us quite a lot, I think.
It probably will. And obviously, we've still got, lots of pre-season to play out, not just in terms of the games you mentioned, James, but also some signings and exits and what have you. And just hearing Basuma's name mentioned, I think you and I talked previously about how excited I was for that signing. I just thought he was terrific beforehand, and for whatever reason, you'll probably know more than me, James, as to why it hasn't worked out. But do you think there could be it's not one of my questions, but just you mentioned him, do you think there could be a renaissance for him under new management and with the system that you just described?
Yeah, he was unfortunate in the sense that obviously Conte wanted to play 3-5-2 or 3-4-3. And the problem was, especially once he added Richarlison, it was like he was trying to shoehorn Richarlison into the team. Son came out. The one game he came out, he come on and got a hat-trick. He left Kulusevski out for a bit. Then the team lost all its creativity. So it was never really to play the 3 in midfield, which would have been more suitable for Bissouma. We saw it fleetingly in a couple of games coming on late, I think, against Everton. It was 0-0 when he took an attacking player off, put Bissouma on, and it changed the game. We won 2-0 and did really well. But those opportunities were difficult. Plus, the midfield 2 for Tottenham, whoever they were, just got completely overrun against almost anybody in the league. So then when he did get in the team, particularly, say, with Højbjerg, who's very limited in terms of his technical qualities, but very obviously willing, hard-working player. You're hanging Bissouma out to dry, right? So with Bentancur, it probably would have worked a little bit better. Then Bentancur got injured. Bissouma got injured. When he came back the last couple of games of the season, he looked right on it, Tom. You could tell the difference in him. He ran out of puff towards the end of the games, particularly the game week 37 game against Brentford. But as it stands, unless Tottenham do something different, as in buy someone, I'm near certain he'll start the season the deep line player, as the 6th.
Well, good luck to him. Like I said, I'd probably a name that the listeners have kind of forgotten a little bit and be forgiven for because he's not seen loads of minutes, has he? But I hope he does well. I think he's a terrific player.
He's one of a number of players. And there's we could do a whole podcast on this, talking about players who in their second season with a new club. We always talk about it with City, particularly. Like, look at how Cancelo progressed, Jack Grealish progressed, etc. It's a brand new season for Bissouma in a brand new Tottenham that's going to be more to he's liking. The early reports are that Postecoglu's identified that he's going to be a key player for him.
Cool. I mean, so to try and route it back to FPL for a minute, I mean, fascinated by the tactics there. But in terms of that away match, Brentford, home match against Man United, away at Bournemouth, before I come on to my specific question, which is about Heung-min Son, so try and avoid talking about him too much if you can. But you liking anyone for game week 1 in terms of Tottenham players? Do you think there's anyone that you'd be encouraging to look at? Obviously, we've not seen preseason play out yet, but just with the limited info you've got, who you liking, mate?
If I had to lock my team in now, I wouldn't have any of them.
No, fair enough. Nor for me, but I just
to be honest, it's price point comparison with other players. So, do I want the second premium with Kane at the moment? Tough.
Hard to do, yeah.
Son versus Rashford. I already spoke about Rashford. Madison versus Foden. Like when I look at these duels at the moment, I'm picking the player from another team, but circumstance might very quickly change.
Yeah, it could change,
where that feels different. And Ndombele, Udogie, Porro. All really interesting. Obviously, the 3 attacking players. Not Kulusevski at the moment. I can't see a circumstance where I'd want to start with him at the moment.
No, fair enough, mate. Okay, good. So I mentioned Sonny just now. So we learned Son last season. I believe, James, you mentioned this on the podcast. I've certainly read as well. He was carrying a not significant injury for a lot of it as well. So he's come in at 9 million this season. Picked up 152 points last season. I was quite surprised when I saw that number. I thought it would have been lower than that, bearing in mind that the criticism he got. You were watching him all season, as you have done over his 7 season. I just wondered what your read is on him as a player, as a prospect under new management. 7 years on the spin now, he's gone north of 150 points. Still an option, declining,
100%.
or like a new signing? What are you thinking?
No.
Talk to us about Sonny and what happened last season and what's going to happen.
It was interesting. I was watching his goals back from the year before, actually, literally last night, and you're like, my God. So it wasn't just the volume of goals he was getting, it was the quality of the goals. And when he went through, you never feel like he's going to miss. He's almost, in terms of pound for pound, in terms of two-footed, you can barely tell the difference between his left and the right. It's so technically good, which makes him, in terms of his shooting ability, so difficult to defend because he lollipop you right and go left or vice versa. If it's true that he was injured for the whole of last season and for whatever reason, the medical staff or Conte or the club or whomever decided not to get him fixed when they brought a £60 million player for that exact scenario to cover for this in Richarlison, why it didn't get sorted is a mystery. However, I reflect on Son in the Amazon documentary, which was it Amazon or Prime? I can't remember now. It's Amazon, isn't it? I think
you're right,
all
mate.
or nothing.
That's right.
He did his arm at Villa. He broke his arm.
Oh, God, I remember that. Yeah,
really early on in the game.
Yeah, and he's carried on.
And he scored a winner in the last minute.
I remember that.
He played the whole game.
Yeah.
So he come in for the scan. They were like, because he was like, this is getting worse. And I've fractured an arm and carried on playing. Admittedly, just 5-a-side. But it's like you stop and the adrenaline comes. You're like, oh, I need to get this checked out. Yeah. This is not right. That's obviously what's happened with him. And his reaction when he got told, is like, your season's over, mate. Bearing in mind this was before COVID, so they're like, you're out for 3 months. Your season's finished, and it was just before the shutdown. And he was like, I can't miss the Champions League game. No, I'm like, Sonny, it's Wednesday. You've got no shot. He's like, peel me up, like whatever you've got to do. Basically, he's like, because Kane was injured as well. He was like,
that's right. Yeah, he knew he was needed, didn't he?
You need me. Like, it was like, you broke your arm, mate. Like you're not. Whatever he'd done, it was like you're out for 3 months. So it wouldn't surprise me, based on that, if he's the sort of character, knowing that Richarlison's in the wings, he's thinking, I might lose my place here. I'm all right. So there probably is a little bit of responsibility on the player as well. So I think we have to give it a little bit of grace. In the back end of the season, we began to see things again that were more like Sonny, which is quite simplistic. It's, can you get beyond Kane? Now, to answer if Sonny's useful for FPL, again, I'm sorry, I'm going to give you the bottle job answer. But as I already said, Postecoglu wants, ideally, his 2 wide players to really hold the touchline. Now, Sonny's just going to be holding the touchline all the time.
Not so
great. Not so good. Now, could he do it where he gets Sonny into a 10 position and Destiny Udogie's racing up the left-hand side and do it that way, for example? Yes. And then that's very interesting, because once he's close to Harry, they've got like a telepathic link where it'll go into Harry and he'll just go. And Harry's capable of finding him. And once he's away, like I said, you expect him to finish. With Sonny last year, it wasn't a case of, he's getting into positions and he's missing big chances. Or wasn't getting into positions. But it was like from day one, Tom, it was like his first touch was horrendous. His second touch was a tackle for half the season. And he did look like a player just overnight, for whatever reason, had lost his ability quite badly in a lot of games. And I think he does really suffer with confidence as well. So if he hits the confidence level where he feels like he's flying, listen, you've got a £9 million player there who this time last year, I went into game week 1 saying I'm captaining him.
Yeah.
And
it's not that long ago, man, is it?
That might come around again very, very quickly, where he goes from essentially a differential right now to someone who ends up in everyone's teams. It's quite capable. I think we know that.
For sure. Nice answers, because he's been a FPL stalwart, hasn't he, over the last 7 years, and given lots of happy memories and lots of points.
If Rashford was like 10 million, Tom, and Son was 9, I'd probably start with Son. That's combo then. That's what I'm saying at the moment. Like, if I have to make that choice now, the favoritism is with Rashford, for example.
Rashford, especially those fixtures, yeah. I mean, you and Ricky talked. I mean, you mentioned Kane, obviously. So from what you're saying, James, you're expecting him to be there game week 1. And there's, at the moment, obviously recording Sunday night, we've heard links with Bayern Munich with paltry bids being submitted. It feels like Levy selling to another Premier League club is a non-starter. So you confident about this, James, and that it's going to be another final hurrah?
I'm sure you've heard me say that if the money's right, etc., and he really wants to go, and there's no chance of him signing a new contract, then Tottenham should absolutely consider. And then you restructure, and then I think about the pressing off the ball and what I said. I've been very critical for Richarlison, but he's a lunatic off the ball, right? If you're getting motivated, etc., he's almost perfect to play that 9 position under Postecoglu. So what I don't want for the new manager is him come in, he finds solutions to what's there with Kane off the ball and the other problems he has, and then next year Kane goes anywhere and he's got to find a completely different solution all over again. I kind of want, if the club truly believe they can keep him beyond next year, then fine, find the solution. Otherwise, I think sell. But it's boring, Tom, because the bottom line is where we're at right now is until Bayern Munich get into 3 figures, which is £100 million, there's not a conversation to be had, I promise you. Tottenham aren't going to be sending him at like 70, 80 million and these sort of numbers. So if Bayern put £100 million there, there's something really to think about. If they're coming out in the press and low balling it and all this jazz where, what they've worked in terms of bullying other clubs in Germany. You piss Daniel Levy off. He's not, as City found out, he's just not going to answer the phone to you. So, there's nothing to be said right now. And very differently to 2 years ago, Kane is not like pushing for it.
No.
So he's agreed terms with Bayern Munich. Sure, fine. I can believe that 100%, but it might also be leverage for a new contract with Tottenham. One of the things I've been saying is I think there's every chance Tottenham could offer him 5-6 years, which a Bayern Munich won't. Bayern Munich ain't going to offer him more than like 3 years at his age. So I think Tottenham still feel they have an element of control where they can sway Kane, particularly say if we did start the season well and Kane's going, this is enjoyable again, etc. And I can lead this. Essentially, if he puts pen to contract, he essentially confirms his status as Tottenham's greatest ever player. And I know, we're not comparing him with Hoddles and Blanchflowers and Mackay's and Greaves, etc. But in terms of the modern day, etc., for the majority of people who haven't seen that era of players, he's the greatest player in the club's history. And that might mean more to him than winning a Bundesliga and moving his family. I don't know the answer, but what I do know is Daniel Levy's not going to get 2 weeks before the end of the window and shit himself and go, do you still want him for 80 million?
No, I can't see it, can you?
It's not.
And you mentioned the Tottenham kudos, James, as well, but obviously the Premier League all-time goal scoring record as well is getting to the point where it is within reach, isn't it? So, even if it was 2 years out at Bayern Munich, the chance of getting that reduces significantly, doesn't it? So I wonder if that will factor into his thoughts as well. So we'll have to wait and see.
I wouldn't be surprised if he did end up going to Bayern Munich for 2 years and came back.
That's what I mean.
To Tottenham in 2 years. He's not even impossible. So I wouldn't say I'm certain that Kane will stay, but I am certain if Bayern Munich don't come up with the money, that he will stay.
Yeah, fair enough, mate. All right, cool. Let's move it on. So that's Tottenham discussed. Next team, James, is Liverpool. So off the back of, for them, bad season, they've signed McAllister from Brighton, as we know. He's in at 6 million, picked up 140 points last season. Trent Alexander-Arnold as well, priced £8 million. I wanted to get your thoughts on Diogo Jota as well, reclassified as a midfielder. He's also at that £8 million price point? Because I noticed he picked up 80 points last season, James, in just 1,100 minutes in 12 starts. So, yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts around him. Sobolowski, probably pronouncing that horribly. Midfielder at 7.
Dominic Szoboszlai.
Cool. Oh, nice one. At 7 million. Gakpo reclassified as a forward, 7.5 million, and no Firmino, excuse me. So, in terms of what's new, there's heaps. There's loads and loads of change. So, just the what kind of one question with a couple of things. So the question is, how do you see them opening up their campaign? They got an away match at Chelsea, a home match at Bournemouth, and an away match at Newcastle in their first 3. But they actually last season got a bad season. They still got over 1,800 points, which was actually 4. So FPL points for their players in a bad season. They were still points options. So who are you liking for that initial part of the season, James? Bearing in mind those reclassifications, and what would your advice be to the listeners?
Make a case for a lot of them. I mean, I'm not going to tell anyone they don't know by saying Trent and Salah are good picks. It's probably
I didn't even mention Salah because I feel like that narrative is.
It's just if it works into your structure, isn't it?
Yeah.
The midfields and forward players at sort of the 7 to 8 bracket are quite difficult to gauge. I think if I had to start with one, it'd be Luis Diaz actually.
Okay.
Purely on that, I'm pretty sure he'll go back to being first choice. He missed the majority of last season, didn't he? I started him last year. He started quite well.
He did.
He was a higher price than what he is now. I'm pretty sure that in Liverpool's first choice team, there's a place for Mo Salah, and I'm pretty sure there's a place for Luis Diaz. The others, with Gakpo, Jota, Nunez, and how that works stylistically at the moment, I'm not sure.
No.
And unless something becomes clear in the next couple of weeks, I don't think I'm brave enough to pick any of them.
Yeah.
Like Jota, if he plays as 9, we all want, don't we?
Yeah.
To be honest, even Nunez, as much as people can say troll and whatnots, he's going to have a little spell in his career at some point. He just goes off mental because he's chaos.
Well, we talked about the second season as well,
and I like
such
him.
A young player. So do I. Very young player as well. It's a new league, isn't it? New country, new team, and a team that wasn't functioning as well. Their midfield was shambolic last season, wasn't it? And they've changed that personnel significantly, as I just mentioned. So they've got all these options, James. Are we saying that we just can't recommend, it's too much of a punt outside of the Trent, Alexander-Arnold and Salah options?
You almost need something to fall into place, don't you? So if we were sitting here in 3 weeks and Nunez is injured and Jota's injured, and we're looking at it going, right, shit, it's probably Diaz, Gakpo, Salah. Yeah. We're talking about Cody Gakpo quite a lot, aren't we? Probably talking about Luis Diaz. So there's things that can fall into place for someone between now and the start of the season that might look really interesting. I think to say right now, I don't know. As I said, it would be Diaz would be the one. That if I had to go and punt into it, would be the one. But then I'd completely agree that probably all 3 of the others might have a little bit more explosiveness than him.
Yeah, it's just I wonder whether or not Diego Jota is going to approach that kind of. There's talk of him leaving the league, isn't there? And Riyad Mahrez, in terms of if you can rely on him getting on the pitch, then he's a great FPL asset because he always returns points. But when he plays, it's 70 minutes. When he starts and when he doesn't, it's so frustrating, etc. Whether or not you just can't sign off on that in good conscience. I mean, how do you actually see them doing this season, James? As I mentioned, they ended the season really well, didn't they? In terms of put together a run that threatened breaching the top 4, which felt an impossibility. What do you feel about this season for them with this new personnel? Yeah,
I think it's difficult to say because I think most of us think the Trent going into midfield is probably going to stick. Although as me and Sush discussed the other week, I'm not quite yet sure what Liverpool's solution is if Trent is unavailable and who takes that. We suggested maybe Jordan Henderson. Well, maybe Jordan Henderson might not be there. And I think the biggest one is obviously Fabinho's future.
Yeah.
So Fabinho didn't have a great season, but as I learnt with Sonny and Eric Dyer, by the way, is another player at Tottenham, was injured the majority of the season. Maybe Fabinho. I remember Fabinho didn't start Old Trafford in game week 3, and I was like, Klopp's lost his mind here. And then when Fabinho got back in the team, I went, I understand why now. Something's not right. Maybe he's another player who was carrying an injury all season. But if he's just regression and the Saudis are offering that volume of money for Liverpool, they should sell. And take it now because they won't get the same offer next year, even from the Saudis, most likely. But it does leave a vacuum in there that isn't filled. So they've been heavily linked with Romeo Lavia, who is a player
Caicedo, right?
I absolutely massively rate. I can't see Liverpool buying Caicedo.
Why is that, mate? Talk to us about why
I just
that
don't
is.
think Liverpool
Money?
pay. I don't think Liverpool pay 100 million for a footballer, and I think that's probably what it's going to cost.
Yeah.
So don't see Liverpool doing that unless they sold Fabinho and maybe one of the other forwards. And it's like, okay, yeah, sure, it's there. I just don't see Liverpool going that high. Lavia is an unbelievable talent. Is he ready to play that position every week for Liverpool right now and then challenge for the league title? Doubtful, I would say. And I think we have to remember that period at the end of the season after the Arsenal game, they didn't have many tough games. They had Villa at home. They had an awful Tottenham at home. They had a good run of away games, which included them conceding 4 away to the team that finished bottom. And I know
they didn't play well in that Villa game,
there was largely
it
was largely a second string team or a much changed team final day of the season. But I wouldn't say they were flooded with clean sheets at that period. So
it wasn't incredible, was it? The results looked good, but performances, I wasn't super close to it.
The results are what I would expect from Liverpool with that sort of run of fixtures, to be totally honest. And that's why I was very reluctant for a long time to rule them out. Because the one thing that they do have the capability of, which gives them, I think, say, more of a chance of winning the league than a United or Newcastle, is they're capable of going 8-9 wins in a row. And we haven't quite seen that from one of the Uniteds yet. And we know from what we saw from Arsenal last year, at the start of last year, that Arsenal were now capable of putting that sort of run together. If you don't have at least one kind of run of like 7, kind of minimum 7 wins in a row at some point, you ain't finishing above Man City.
No, can't see
because Man City might win 32 games, right? So you've got to have serious consistency, which Liverpool have shown they can do. I think for Liverpool to challenge for the title, they have to start really well, which needs them to sort their away record out. So the first 5 away from home: Chelsea, Newcastle, Wolves, Tottenham, Brighton.
Yeah, it's tough.
Now,
tough enough.
Yeah, that is a tough one. To be honest, from the corresponding fixtures last year, they got 7 points. Included winning at Tottenham and they won at Newcastle, ironically. But it also included a battering at Brighton, a battering at Wolves, and they drew 0-0 at Chelsea. And largely picked a second team.
James, you mentioned the word battering a few times then. Like defensively under Klopp, right? Historically, we've lauded Virgil van Dijk, haven't we? You talked in fond about Joel Matip in the past, and I know that you're a fan of Konate and what have you, but they've just not. And obviously, you talk about the fullbacks at length, as you have done on many shows with Serge. Allison, I know, is a top goalkeeper as well. But do you think it's all down to that midfield problem last season?
It puts too much pressure on.
Too much pressure on and that high line that they keep and what have you. Is that what it is?
I think the high line is not so much a problem because they've always done it. I'm becoming less convinced that Virgil van Dijk likes it, by the way. But they've done it for years. So I don't think we can... It's easy. When there are bad results, it's easy to say, oh, it's the high line. But no one talks about it when they win 6-7 games in a row, right? So
good point.
I think it's the pressure built in the midfield. Like they've almost lost control a little bit. Like at their best, they're 100 mile an hour in your face. You lose Mane and Firmino from the attack off the ball, and then the midfield hasn't got the legs to press anymore. Then you're pressing without conviction anymore, and that would be alien for them because Liverpool at their best pressing is the best pressing team I've seen anywhere. I think
it's fun to watch.
So when it's broke down, like your fall from how good it is, it becomes really bad and really obvious. So the pressure from the midfield became too great, and McAllister and Szoboszlai going in there. If you put that in there, and Fabinho can regain what he was and stays, then that has incredible potential as a midfield.
It's a bit different, isn't it, from where they were last season? Just in personnel, we only need to see it gel and what have you. But it's exciting to see.
I would say you mentioned Konate. I wouldn't rule him out from an FPL perspective.
Yeah, no, you mentioned him previously.
Literal, logical thinking about it and going, Trent's 3 million more. So now the debate becomes, right, Trent's got to justify the extra 3 million on offensive stuff. I think Robertson, as it stands, is avoidable. Yeah, because with what Trent's doing, his brakes on. A lot more, and that's also stopping Van Dijk getting pulled out into wide areas, which people are beginning to expose.
I owned Konate for the back end of last season, James, for a long stretch there,
and you probably didn't like it, did you?
Do you know what? There was a lot of things when you watch him play. I'm with you. I actually just the thing that would frustrate me more than anything is the discipline. I actually found he would often find himself picking up silly yellow cards, which in FPL is an absolute nightmare. It just punishes you so hard. So I hear what you mean. 3 million is loads when you're comparing literal, if you consider defensive output in FPL as a team metric, then you have to think of it in those terms. Obviously,
if Liverpool were to become really good defensively and Trent's not providing the attacking returns,
then
and Konate's paying every week.
Yeah.
What are you paying for Trent for?
Exactly. So yeah,
Trent would have to justify the attacking returns. And we know, of course, he's capable. Of course he is. I wouldn't rule out starting with Trent and going, this is wrong. You'd almost rather do that than start with Konate and go, oh, now I've got to find 3 million. That's a problem. And I get that. Enough, but I think there's something for people to think about there if Konate looks assured to continue to start at the start of the season.
Fair enough, man. One to watch. Look, moving on. I've got one more team to tackle now, James. I chose Brighton. So you mentioned that they gave Liverpool a pasting last season, so it's a nice segue there as well. So they had an amazing season, didn't they, last season? Loads of incredible moments and FPL relevance. So I included that their overall points total as a comparison to Liverpool was just a little bit behind. They were like 1,700 and change in comparison to Liverpool. But the changes that they've had is turnover. So we mentioned McAllister already. We're talking about Caicedo, not left yet, but there's talk of him being poached, isn't there? They've brought in James Milner. They've got new goalkeeper. Is it Verbruggen? Is it pronounced, James? Not sure.
Bart Verbruggen, yeah.
Yeah, João Pedro as well. Opening games, you and Serge have talked about as well. Home match against Luton, away match at Wolves, and a home match against my guys, West Ham.
It's great.
It's an amazing start, right? Really favourable prices, typically low that we've talked. I wondered what your thoughts were on how FPL managers should approach them this season for game week 1. Like Evan Ferguson signed a new contract. He's in at 6 million. Such a prospect already. God, I love that player. They've got, is it Enciso? Is that how you pronounce in midfield at 5.5 million?
Diamond talent, yeah.
57 points, James, in 7 starts is incredible from last season. He's been classified as a midfielder. And Estupinian, as we know in the FPL community, super popular. So just a sort of holistic question. What do you think? Still confident on them irrespective of the personnel change and how are you tackling them for game week 1?
With difficulty at the moment. And I say with difficulty, probably dropping the spoiler here. I think Sam's probably going to be last on correspondent week because I think there's probably more players to choose from them than any other team. In the sense that, sure, there's a Stupinan, but something might develop closer where we have a bit more confidence than an Adam Webster or a Van Heck. Van Heck's 4. And it's not even impossible to start. I wouldn't think so at the moment. But if they don't add and say Webster or Dunk's not fit, it's not impossible. Then you're same thing. Oh, do I want to pay that million more for Estupinan? Verbruggen potentially could be great. Yeah, he's an upgrade on Steel. It's not clear at the moment if he'll start in goal. You've got the likes of Joel Veltman's consistent if you think he's going to play enough. Gross, we largely ignored in sort of the March Mitoma discussion last year.
We shouldn't have done.
He was the highest point scorer in the end.
That's right.
Milner might take penalties. We're not quite sure where he's going to play. March on the right, Mitoma on the left, and even through the middle, you've got between Enciso, Ferguson, and João Pedro. No one's talking about, and he's the cheapest of the forwards, 5.5. All fairly decent options, and yet the one De Zerbi might prefer the most is Welbeck, who, to be honest, in this team with the fluidity in it, is a danger player as well. With Welbeck, you're obviously never more than 1 week away from the potential injury. But there genuinely is, I think, 7 or 8 Brighton players that could be strongly considered.
You're going to be piling in, James, with the treble, do you think?
I think at the moment, safe play sitting in the draft is Estupinan and Mitoma and move that as and where necessary. I think you definitely want some of it at the start because of what it could be. It's not to say it'll be great, but it could be. You know what they're capable of. I mean, for Luton, I always think playing promoted teams right at the start is something you don't want. You almost want them to get over the giddy excitement where it's like they're playing cup finals and it's like, oh, we've realised this is really tough.
Yeah.
But the culture shock for Luton to play Brighton, this is different stuff because no one in this league plays like Brighton. They will, at the end of that game, whatever the result will be like, I'm not sure we can do this every week. The good news for Luton is every other game gets a bit easier than playing Brighton, even if the technical qualities of some others, even if the technical qualities of some others are better and more consistent, etc. Brighton could batter Luton and draw 0-0. They could batter them and beat 6-0. They're capable of that sort of thing. And then you look at the 2 afterwards. Wolves away, they won 3-2 last year. West Ham at home, they won 4-0 last year. So
cheers. Thanks, man.
We're looking at those first 3 and saying, if I said to you now, Brighton only scored 5 goals from them first 3, you'd probably be surprised.
Yeah, it would.
Is probably the point. So, definitely want some of it.
What Evan Ferguson, James. I would
Love him.
wrap things up now. I mean, I do too. I just think he's
Harry Kane's replacement if he goes, mate. I wouldn't rule it out, by the way.
You know what I mean, I wondered, he signed this new contract. Secretly, I was pleased. I'd like to see him develop a bit more, but I think
next year, by the way, definitely not this summer. Maybe
yeah. But I think before that contract was signed, I did wonder whether or not if he hadn't have done, there would have been a lot more talk about him this summer that we're in right now, because I do think it's right at the beginning of his career, isn't it? But goodness me, he looks a player. I'm not even going to say prospect. He just looks a player. I mean,
he does.
Do you think he's gonna have the sort of breakthrough FPL season this time around, where we're actually going to start saying, actually, this is someone who's next season going to command a sort of price point that we see of the top strikers in the game?
It's really difficult because you look at the first three, and I'd almost say the fourth game as well, because Newcastle at home is the fourth game. Then you got the international break. So you got 3 home games and Wolves away at the start. Yeah. So that's perfectly reasonable. Great start, for any teams. Fine. After that, they obviously go to Old Trafford in 5, and then the European football starts. Yeah. And we saw last year at the end, like when they had to go Nottingham Forest on a Wednesday night, and after the cup semi, it was like their legs were taken away.
Different gravy, man. Different gravy.
Exactly. And it will take some adjustment of getting used to that. Now, I've said this before, that I think this is the first time Brighton have ever got in Europe. They're not going to be playing necessarily their weakest team on a Thursday.
No, it's a big deal, man.
Subject to who they draw, it's going to be a really big deal. Like if they've got, I don't know, Seville or something like that in the Europa League, or Roma or whomever, and De Zerbi wheels out a second team, fans are going to go nuts. Yeah. They'll want to see the best team possible on the pitch, and for Brighton to have their glory night, etc. So that becomes really awkward. And actually, they do run into a tough set of fixtures where they've got Villa, Liverpool, City, sort of 7, 8, 9, etc. But I think for the
while down the road, though, isn't it?
You want it, and the rotation at the start is. But I think you need to be conscious that with them. I think when you start a draft at the start of the season, there's certain players okay, if I invest in Haaland, subject to injury, he's there, and he's probably not going anywhere as long as he does what he expects. A Bukayo Saka, if you start with him, if he performs well with the fixtures Arsenal got in the first 7, he's not going anywhere. The Brighton players, despite how good they could be, I think you are looking quite short term with preparation for coming off. And to be honest, that's the main reason why I probably won't start with 3. But I probably would. I think his Stupinan at the moment would be worth covering off. And the sensible answer right now, sorry, it's boring. It's the same with Mitoma.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think you're right, James. And the sensible play is definitely one that people advocate for game week 1, isn't it? And so I'm super excited by. So I'll probably end up with him, because I'm gonna have some fun this season, and my team's gonna be a bit.
I've said it's Stupinan and Mitoma. I wouldn't be surprised to start the season at Sisso and Ferguson. Yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised.
Dude, that's it. I did 5 teams. I think we could have done all 20 if Sudge is away again in the coming days. We can come back and revisit someone, because the headline of what's new you could apply to all these teams. But I just thought those 5 teams, James, are ones which are probably going to feature in people's game week 1 selection, which is why I picked them. So hopefully the listeners have enjoyed it.
Oh well, we didn't talk about Arsenal or Chelsea. I'm well pleased.
Yeah, here. I don't want to talk about Arsenal
or West Ham. I quite enjoyed this one. Tom, thank you so much for your
Pleasure,
time.
Man.
I really enjoyed that. Super good, as it always is, speaking to you, mate. Couple of bits before I go, if I can. As I did mention, Correspondent Week is in 2 weeks, starting today. That will feature a new Crystal Palace correspondent. Rory McLaughlin-Dowd has been appointed our new Crystal Palace correspondent from within our Patreon community. He's a lovely bloke, big Eagles fan. I think you'll really like him. Mig decided that he wanted to step down because, in all honesty, love him. He's so good. Particularly the YouTube viewers will miss him, because he used to rock up. He used to rock up eating his dinner like with his goalkeeper shirt on, and his get up was great. As he said himself, there's only so many times you can say Jordan Ayew was industrial, though. But Mig is strongly thinking of not playing FPL this year. He didn't want to not do it justice, as to put it in his own words.
Migs, you be you.
Yeah, love Mig. Lots of love if you're listening, pal. So Rory will be part of that. Super bloke. You'll really like him. In terms of content this week, Sudge is away, as I said. Tomorrow I got another one of our patrons, Lauren Harris, joining me for a Women's World Cup preview. That starts Thursday morning. I did a podcast on Patreon with Lauren last year prior to the Euros. One of the favourite pods I've ever recorded. Lauren is an absolute sweetheart. I'm sure you'll love her. Luke Williams joining me for the Sky Pod on Wednesday. Clayton will be back with me for the transfer window show on Thursday, and I'll be doing my Ask James stream on Friday. If you want to support the show, it's www.patreon.com/Planet FPL, which includes your usual favourites this week, such as the Q&A and Tottenham Ask this week rather than Tottenham, because Sir ain't here, so Clayton stands in his place, basically. Also includes doing mental health with James Wilson, mental health and FPL on Friday, and Thursday money in football with Chris Church on Manchester United and the takeover that's still not happened.
Looming.
Doesn't look. It's like every week with United and the takeover, it's like, it must be this week. And then by the end of the week, you think that's not going to be for weeks. And it's like repeat the cycle over and over again.
I'd be interested to listen to that one, James. I just don't think two of the Glazers just don't want to sell. I think Joel and Avram just want to stay because they see it as a cash cow. So, but I'll listen to that one with interest.
Good man. Thank you so much, Tom. Where can everyone follow you on the Bird app, socials, FPL content? Yeah,
I'll give Fantasy Football Fix a little plug right at the end. I do weekly videos for them, or do once the season starts. So check us out on the fantasyfootballfix.com YouTube channel. If you've got half an hour or so each week, then come and have a look at me talking to some managers on there. And you can get me directly on Twitter at UtterlyTC.
Tom hasn't invited me yet, I've noticed.
Busy boy, James, all that content.
No, you know what it is, isn't it? You keep asking experts, so you ain't going to ask me.
I couldn't possibly comment.
Tom, brilliant. Thanks so much.
Pleasure,
Give Tom
man.
a
Thanks for
follow
having me
at UtterlyTC and check his stuff out on Fantasy Football Fix as well. But it just leaves me to say thanks again so much to Tom. Be nice to each other, everyone. Remember to play it your way. We've still got a long time to go. Cue music, please. Man child.